Hello. Thanks for everyone to come in to this. We've got a mixture of people that we've invited who we know are already doing self-organised things similar to what we're doing, or completely different. And I guess there's a few kind of questions that we're interested in asking around. I'm Tom and this is Roger from Arcadians and System Space. We're setting up with Susanna and Martha of school, who are doing a 2-day thing today and tomorrow it's Saturday, which is going to be sort of more seminar based, I guess, which is slightly different to this. So we're going to be trying to talk through with people who have kind of prepared a little bit, maybe, I hope, about things like who's the public that we're talking to as self-organised spaces. What are we trying to do by self-organising? Why are we not kind of trying to be more institutional? Or like established institutions and things like that.
Are we trying to be institutional?
Yeah, I'll just see what else we're talking. And also at the same time, because a lot of, I know that I recognise what a lot of people are doing is kind of actually just getting on and doing with it. Sort of like pragmatic discussion about how we all go about doing self-organised spaces, how we survive with self-organised spaces and things like that. Spaces or initiatives or publications or things like that. I suppose we could go around and talk, just like everyone who's invited to say what they do. Or, is that okay? Do you want to talk first? Kind of organise this.
So we set up School and Journey, which are sort of interdependent program of newsletters that we publish every month, and a series of nomadic seminars. So we're not based in Bristol, but we sort of move around, utilising the spaces that I guess in existence. There's such an incredible world of amazing stuff going on in Peckham. We thought instead of setting somewhere up ourselves, we'd like to just use them. And so this is the second event that we've done. We did the first one at Peckham Hotel, which was quite a nice place to start off. So it was so sort of temporary. And we had some discussions with Roger about what we were doing, and it sort of, just sort of synchronised with some of your comments.
At the start of the discussion.
Yeah, it kind of just happened that we were coming from a similar place. And so we decided to try and work something out together. We're actually having a conversation in December about jobs and careers, and someone sort of got involved and actually told us that what we were doing, we were just sort of practicing our hobbies and our interests and stuff. And I think Roger and I were slightly, in a weird way, I don't really know why, but we're quite offended slightly, because I think to say that what I'm doing, or I think what Roger's doing on a daily basis, to kind of just name it as a hobby. It's a bit.
So the reason behind it being that person calling it a hobby was because there was no kind of wage, the value wasn't based on.
Who was the person that said that?
It was Felix Petty of Holiday. His reasoning for doing so is because we're not getting paid by some sort of body,
Did they, when they ran modern, sorry, just keep cutting.
This is Will from Sunday Paint.
Hi. When they ran modern, did they take a wage?
No.
But he was saying that his
call it a hobby?
wages from writing and that often modern's a hobby because they might make their money to self-organise, yet they are not getting a wage, and the value, what gives something value and then classes it as a job is a wage.
Is that in terms of definitions?
That was his definition, and we got really pissed off basically.
We sort of took it a bit further, and we extended the conversation and thought like to have a bigger discussion with people who are in a very similar situation, who are self-organising and who are putting stuff on and doing stuff, not necessarily being paid for it. I think it's, you know, obviously much, it's worth it. Aside from that, anyway, so school, quite simply, is because I think I have too many conversations with people where I'm just so totally moved and like totally inspired by what people are saying, and all the kind of stuff just like goes, is totally obsolete because it doesn't go anywhere, and you know, people write stuff and it doesn't go anywhere, and it's difficult because I don't want to name it as like a forum or a platform or anything just yet, but I think we want it to sort of have a thing. I don't want to say it's space because it's not space. Do you want to carry on? I'm not really very good at this.
It's just basically we're not really trying to. We haven't really got any objective as such, which makes it quite odd, I think. But we just want people to talk about interesting things really, and for other people to be kind of inspired by that, and everyone to kind of share what they know, and for good things to happen from there. So I don't know. Hopefully that's what we're doing. That's kind of what we're doing now.
Yeah.
I think.
And by good things, I think it's largely based around this idea of like totally pure knowledge exchange. It's kind of like there's no sort of nothing kind of further from that really. Also on a side note, I'm part of Kiosk, which is the other two girls unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. They were meant to be coming, but I'm like travelling two boats now. So Kiosk is a practice-based research group, and we sort of formed on the back of an MA at Goldsmiths in a very similar way to Tom and Rocha and St Martin's. So we look at largely around sort of collaborative work and communicative exchange over various sort of modes of space. Anyway, that's what I'm doing. That's the other side.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Alex Russell from Superlative TV, who's co-done Code Thingy with Gary, me and Ola.
Code Thingy!
And it's interesting to hear what you're saying, because we're kind of, to use Hans Obrist's idea, we're kind of like just mesmerised. We get mesmerised a lot by all these wonderful things happening, and we want to document it and show it to a wider audience who might not be able to be here. And we're filming, like this is going to be invited to film, and we'll help you make TV, and if you want us, drop us an email.
Do you want to talk, Holly, about?
Oh, right, my turn.
Yeah.
No, just particularly picking up on this idea of like wanting to share what is going on around us, kind of contextually or something which may not be, or like taken up by other places, or
Yeah.
because I suppose in a way that's kind of how you started, Alex. Is that right?
Yeah, sort of. So I don't know if everyone will know, so maybe I'll just
Yeah, definitely.
The Artix started first in January 2010 as a website. It's a weekly listing, but focusing on kind of non-commercial, mainly artist-led project spaces and galleries. Mainly because I was working in a commercial gallery and was realising that I wasn't hearing anything about the kind of younger artists and so forth. I hadn't studied in London as well, so I didn't have a kind of network of young artist friends or anything like that. So yeah, I guess in a way it started out and it's just a kind of interest in what other people were doing. And then we started doing the magazine and the tours magazine, and for which we invite young artists, curators, art writers, and also people who sort of set up gallery spaces on their own initiative to talk about their practice or the kind of reasons behind what they're doing. So, yeah, so sort of focusing on what people are often doing on their own initiative.
That's a good introduction to that. And Lois and Adam are doing a similar thing in Manchester. Is that right? You're kind of starting from a kind of.
Well, we're setting up a space which is for curators rather than sort of artists necessarily, so it'll be made up of curatorial residencies. And we wanted to set that up because we didn't really feel there was much opportunity for that, especially in Manchester, which is where I'm based. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really exactly the same.
But that, I mean, that's partly why we asked you to come down, is that we all primarily operate down in South Way in Peckham, very close. And they're just interested in how, like, what the sort of feeling in terms of in Manchester might be, because it's quite close, and the existing art institution or art world is quite close to us being in London. Is there a sort of it's a different set of imperatives, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason we set something up is because there's not, I mean, there isn't a lot of opportunity, and there definitely is not opportunity to do what you want to do. And what we wanted to do sort of when we were graduating, there was nowhere that we could go do that. So that's the reason we decided to set it up ourselves, or are in the process of setting it up.
Have you guys got a space lined up?
Yeah.
It's like a big space, it's like a railway archway in Manchester, but it's smaller.
And funding wise, like, how would you cover that?
We've got
Alright.
so that's in kind funding. So we're like in the second stage trying to get the bulk of the funding at the moment. But it's funded by, at the moment, we have like 3 main institutions, and then a lot of it is also, we've got to find private funding.
Right, that's part of the kind of, that's like in the kind of, for you to get the first funding, you need to match it with the...
Yeah, but I think because we have the space for free, it's actually like a massive part of our budget. So it means that the rest of the budget can be a bit bigger.
Right.
But it's still a really tight budget, and no one's really getting paid properly.
Yeah.
Everyone's getting, it's more sort of like subsidised, so everyone's still going to have to work part time to do the project. But it means like we can work a couple of days and then do this for the rest of the time.
That's really good then.
So yeah, but that's, I mean, as well, it's like the first major funding we've got. We have been funded in the past, but it's for quite small amounts.
Yeah.
So because this is like the first major.
Because that's what I find interesting, is the fact that a lot of, I think, kind of other cities that aren't London, basically our world isn't really there, and you can't really rely upon that source of income. So I think that in terms of like curatorially, it's a lot more pure often, or a lot more kind of maybe less jaded than a lot of like London places, because it can be, but then it's in a luxurious position because you're not many people are gonna buy the work, if any, and so
Yeah. I think in that sense, so it's not, what we're doing isn't really that, it's not a commercial space anyway, that's not what we're trying to put out.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to make money in some way, but we need to find a creative way of doing
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I was on the point of mentioning.
Sorry.
I think also though, from what you're saying, that we want to talk about maybe a bit later is what's is that you're setting up something because you finished art school and there wasn't spaces and there wasn't opportunities, and I think that we all need to be quite reflective, those of us that are doing stuff in London, as to why would we want to set something up, because there are lots of existing spaces. You know, it makes a lot more sense to set up something because there's a massive void and it's kind of needed, maybe, you know, whereas here we kind of need to question our motives, I think, a little bit more.
Or statement, I suppose that's
Yeah.
running into setting up a gallery and then just getting on with doing it. Maybe includes what you're...
I think that here though there's a much more realistic understanding of what it actually entails to set up your own space. Like that people know there's other people doing it, and it is going to be, you've got your sort of, here especially, you're really like self-contained, you do it all, sort of just keep it going by yourself, whereas it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of that
And that kind of, but I think part of that's because it's maybe really difficult to get funding, like here. Like
I would say it's easy to get funding in Manchester unless you've already been funded.
but you've also got other models like Outpost in Norwich, and they kind of like they have art studios as well, but they're like that's at the hub of the scene there.
Yeah.
So it works throughout that.
We do have spaces like that. Like it's a mill, for example, is a really good example of that. They have like a venue space and then they have loads of studios. But on our sort of level, there isn't really anyone who's gone into it like business minded, sort of like how are we actually going to pay for this? People are much more likely to sort of think, oh, we'll try and get funded, rather than like just sort of be really, I can't think of the word, but like just maintaining yourself, and just maintain yourself and being absolutely like we don't need anyone's funding, we just do it ourselves and come up with like actually a business model that supports what you're trying to do, so you can be completely
Self-sufficient.
Yeah, there's not much of that. There is like bigger places, but not people starting out finding space and doing it that way.
Islington Mill is named Grace I sort of practice between Liverpool, Leeds and London. But Islington Mill in Manchester is quite a good example because they did set up just two guys. They'd like done a foundation in Manchester and sort of felt like there wasn't much access to the things they wanted to be doing on the courses that were available in Manchester. So they sort of set up like an experimental learning project in a mill, and then it also developed a gig space and studios, and so now it's like 4 years from here, and it's like
Really capacity. They had to buy the mill as well, so there's bigger obstacles in the way of that. But yeah, I think so it's the art academy basically.
Yes.
I think that's a really good example because they just set that up like we do it ourselves, and that is still going.
Yeah.
And it's got loads of international links and stuff as well.
And maybe it's quite interesting, sort of with regards to thinking about when we do set up arts-run spaces or smaller spaces, is it that you have the hope that they will then become an institution in themselves, or is it that you do actually want to sort of ground them in this space and retain that quality? I mean, Islington Mill, although it has become a real focal point for things happening in Manchester, there is something about it, I think, which does retain that self-organised aesthetic in that is grounded in the education programme that they run there. They have like some of the studio spaces that they run are for like graphic design and more sort of commercial endeavours, but the education programme that they run there is.
I think that the education, if you're talking about art academy, it is like a closed group of people though. And it is funded with like the gigs and events, but they have received funding as well, so they're not entirely.
Yeah. I think they got some from sort of
the council. They got quite because they did like a whole restructure of the downstairs. It's a big lump there. But it is amazing. Recommend it to them. But yeah. When we were sort of setting up our project, we did quite a lot of research going around different cities, sort of trying to find out what they've been doing, if they had anything similar, sort of based on what we were doing, trying to just work with curators and events. And we aren't necessarily, we have like a base, like a space for people to work from, but we're not necessarily going to hold everything in that space, so we're trying to encourage people to actually work outside of the space, but just have that as a base. And we did find, I think when we came down here, we went to 4 different galleries down here, and there's a lot of emphasis on marketing and how you present yourself as a project space or as a gallery, which was quite a surprise. They
were very adamant about what our identity was going to be to the public, and that was what they focused on. But they were more, they were sort of artist-led spaces maybe however many years ago, but yeah, they're the kind of ones that have got a bit stable. I think it's not, sometimes it's not a question of wanting to become an institution, it's a question of kind of you just get used to old habits more than anything, and that's how you kind of become an institution to the outside, but you probably don't feel like that inside.
There's a few people we spoke to actually as well in Scotland. You've got a good model, which is because we used to run a festival as well, which we've done for 3 years, but we've just handed that over to someone else. But actually, there's a transmission place called Transmission in Glasgow where they have like a rolling board of directors. So every 2 years, someone new has to come in. To an extent, it's an institution because it's a name that's been going for a long time, but actually, what they're trying to stand for and what they're trying to do is going to change every 2 years. So
I think a few places that's similar to Outpost, which is people shadow. They shadow people working for 2 years, and then everyone kind of moves up this like pyramid and then leaves, but basically can be someone who can offer advice. So it's like a handed down model.
yeah.
There's always new people like taking it on. But yeah.
But that's really interesting, like sort of saying, right, we've done this, and
But
just giving
it's got to be.
someone to
I mean,
go
I
on.
just always think about the people who originally started it. It's going to be really hard to then, because that's the hardest bit, I think, to start it and then to relinquish control and hand it over. Must take a lot of.
I'm not like just we started the festival, and like I said, it's just like we've done it for 3 years now, and it's like it's going really well and everything, but it does feel like a really natural thing to do because there's some other project we want to move on to anyway, which is this one. But it's actually quite interesting to see what the new director's doing with it, and just meeting up with her, she's doing her first year, but. I can see what you mean, that it must be difficult and we're a bit nervous at first, but it's actually quite exciting to see what someone else does with that idea. Because essentially it's going to be the same thing, but it's got a really different structure.
I think there's some question about when does a self-organised space become an institution? Do you want to turn into an institution, or methods of avoiding it? I think it might be good to ask Pauline to explain what you do and about kind of where you see the point of crossing over, where you see yourself as becoming kind of validated institution or not. I don't know.
So we've been doing 17 years. So I run a magazine, Mute, which is the most recent one is up there. But
It's for
also,
sale.
so I left some of the very old ones somewhere in the room. I don't know where they've gone. I think when we started, definitely there was a sort of self-organizational impulse in the sense that we really felt very frustrated with the way that things were. A few kind of distinct frustration areas I could outline were the fact that the internet had sort of become recently popularized, so this is in 1994, and the art press was completely ignoring it. So the only place in which you could see this enormous, potentially enormous sort of socializing, democratizing phenomena being discussed was very corporately inflected American magazines or kind of utopian but in a kind of very extreme hippie way rave culture. And we felt that as artists there was so much in this phenomenon that we, in terms of these very old questions about how producers reach their audiences, the gatekeepers of galleries and critics, curators, how this might circumvent them, that we really didn't understand why there wasn't a sort of critical engagement with this thing. So then I think there was also a frustration or a gradual sort of disillusionment with what was then already a very commercialized art world, but that's nothing compared to what it is now. I mean, the market, where I sort of had my, scales taken off my eyes, was at places like the Cologne Art Fair, or, the Frieze Art Fair, nothing like that existed at the time. But going to these kind of markets really showed me, what art is, how it's traded, and presented a very different image of it to me than I had experienced at art school. So that sort of synced with the potential of the internet to do something in a much more self-directed way, and cemented this desire to do something that wasn't based on me as a kind of individual artist trying to gain patronage or sort of affirmation from various senior figures like gallery owners or critics. So I think all of that is quite similar to maybe what drives people to self-organise. But we did use the vehicle of a magazine to do it. And in terms of the form, I think we were still very much at the tail end of this kind of period of art when artists were trying to buck the demand for like an artistic authenticity or a singularity. So what they were doing a lot were appropriating other artists' established styles, or in the area of media, taking, let's say, riffing on a Coca-Cola emblem or riffing on another established format. So we, in our case, used the Financial Times and got it printed at this incredibly high-tech press that used to exist in St Clement's Dock, where the FT ran all its newspapers through this sort of big glass printing press. And so sort of in how it looked in the beginning, it was very much an art project, but then we started to engage with all the issues that you engage with as a publisher, and we've become a business, a funded cultural organisation. We have gradually, like in 1998, I think, we started to realise, or started to feel that we couldn't anymore rely on free contributions, so that's when we started to pay our writers. Similarly, although we in the beginning, like you, used to do digital design work for a variety of people, we gradually moved towards making our organisation as the primary sort of wage earning thing, although we always failed at it miserably. So we've become, I'd say, more of an organisation and business than an institution, but definitely to the degree that we're kind of visible and can apply for funding or be regularly funded, which we were for a long time. I'd really feel a bit weird saying it was a self-organised project at this point. But in terms of this, what you described, like the staleness, I think, I suppose what I think maybe marks us out is either that we're completely crap at doing good marketing and have never learned, or that we never feel that we've sort of found the perfect magazine, the perfect project. So we keep that kind of striving, partly because the market tells us that we're failing. Like, we never sell enough, we never get enough funding. So there's this weird way in which our financial failure has, which isn't total because we haven't got the funding, etc., but has impelled us to try out a lot of new things, make new relationships, work in groups that we otherwise might not have, sought out. And I think, if anything, that points to the fact that we're working with another definition of value, maybe. It's not like only 10 people read the magazine, but in terms of market dynamics, we're not being told by the market that we're brilliant.
Do you have to? Someone else can say.
I was just wondering, would you kind of introduce a sense of pessimism about these things. I mean, it's kind of utopian idea which is compromised from the start. You have to accept these sort of business models. You have to accept it's going to be a failing business in a sense.
Isn't what you're saying that makes you safe from being stale because it forces you to continue to push things, and that you can't settle into like to habits, to it running really well? No.
Well, first of all, I think we believe enough in what we do and the necessity of what we do to not listen to that sort of response from the market to the point where we think we are genuine fakers. It's more that to still stick around, it has forced us to do other things.
Sorry, I wasn't saying you were failing.
No, I know, but that no, it's somewhere maybe in between the two, and it means that I don't regard, I mean, sometimes I do feel very pessimistic, but I don't think we need to be pessimistic. What I think is much more problematic is the kind of weight of this kind of compliance culture, that the kind of conventions of success impose upon people's behaviour, and then the rules of both private funding and public funding imposed upon people.
Yeah.
So like, we did used to get public funding, but it was quite difficult to, even just on the level of work, reporting as a very small organisation, to the level that a lot of funders need. And it sort of twists the shape of organisations, I think, in a way that isn't really true to what they want to do. To the point where, when we got defunded last year, so that sort of happens now in around April, we stopped getting funding, I gradually realised that actually that was probably quite a good thing.
Yeah. Because I always think that the places I know, if somewhere's really been going around for a long time, then their funding's kind of a little more secure and it doesn't impact so much on their program. But if it's something that's relatively new, I get the feeling that for you to qualify for that funding, you have to jump through so many other hoops that kind of morph and twist away from your original idea of what it should be.
I think it depends who you're applying for funding for as well, though, because you might be lucky enough to find someone that is actually trying to support what you're trying to do. It's quite rare, but I do really agree with what you're saying, that if you're applying for funding, it's almost like you have something to aim for because of those rules of what people are looking for. So it's sort of set what you're going to do, sort of almost set what the outcome is going to be to an extent, because they have some things that they want feedback on. They want it to be a certain way if you want funding again. You kind of have to meet that. So it does work both ways.
I mean, that's why, I don't know, I mean, when we started, a lot of people who had done actual publishing, told us all the things we needed to know and asked us all these questions, and we were just incredibly naive and cookie, and we were like, yeah, we'll be fine. But I think in terms of kind of models for working, it does feel like it would be a lot more attractive to have a kind of direct relationship with, for want of a better word, your audience, and try and build up an economy that isn't dependent on these other interested parties or funders, and even the private funds that they encourage that you get. It's just that I think that's easier in certain realms than others. Like, it seems easier maybe in music because there's still, or like socialized spaces like bars, or there are certain spaces in which it's easier to have money transactions that support the culture.
Where you create your own audience or public, within which you can act.
Make something happen.
Yeah. I mean, how big could that grow, or should it? I mean, should it become big enough that it could support all sort of small self-run organisations?
Yeah, and if you don't have that public that is self-supporting, is that a factor which is basically a massive flag or signal to you that maybe you shouldn't be doing it? Like if you don't have, do you know what I mean? If you don't have enough people that are
Some
actually
quite
running that,
small
then
organisations that run on that anyway, not necessarily arts-based, but where they sort of rely on a group of people with a similar interest to donate money and have fundraisers and things like that, and they sort of run events, but no one's going to get paid. Like no one's, it's not as good as it seemed. I think like it'd be like we were sort of talking about trying to run a project where everyone chips in and everyone decides what happens in that space. So if you pay £10 a year, you get to be on part of like a sort of a panel to decide what happens in that space.
5 years time like that, cooperative where they all pay a certain amount to be like a member of the council. 5 years time.
The Cube, have you ever been to the Cube in Bristol? That's a really amazing project. That's like a cinema and music space, and it's a mix of free labour and ticketing, but they have a really cooperative sort of cinema.
Is that kind of, was that workable with an art kind of space project, or where art, like, if you're going to continue making sort of valuable art objects or products, is that, I suppose, because it like you said, like in sociable models like bars or music where there's a kind of easy exchange, I don't know, is it kind of, would it fit with something like this, like a kind of conventional exhibition model, where you have to, I don't know, whether the financial exchange is kind of so rarefied traditionally into collectors, or, I mean, that's the kind of like...
I think that is I think the two questions are related, and you have such a plural sort of art world now that, all forms of production exist next to each other and everything that's fine. And collectors exist for all kinds of art, but to me, the kind of development of the form of the art is also connected to how it's produced, interpreted, discussed. So let's just say I haven't thought a lot about how to sell large artworks or expensive artworks.
Can I just ask what's our criteria for an institution?
Well, yeah, I think
Mainly
that's
at you.
something.
Are you, Rosa?
Well, yeah, no, I think that's something that is worth thinking about, and also saying, I think institution will get around a lot in this conversation is this kind of bad word. I don't necessarily think that's true. Obviously, we need to structure groups of people, societies, systems, places to be, and there's a want for institutions. We've probably all been part of one.
What is that? Anything that's a collective group of people?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Is it focused on an audience, like with a remit?
So having a very specific...
Yeah, because I don't think it needs to be a physical space, so that rules out that, but I think it is kind of a unified, I suppose we often associate it with being branded, but I think maybe that's a newer thing. But yeah, I think something that has a remit, something that has kind of objectives. I think that we could all use institution as kind of we're a self-organised space, we're not an institution, but I think essentially a lot of the time you are mimicking what you've learned from passing your whole life through one institution to another. From nursery, you could call that an institution. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think maybe there could be good or bad institutions. But yeah, I reckon...
And what's the other thing?
What do you mean?
What's the thing that's not an institution? Like
everything else. I think everything's an institution. If you've got a supermarket's not an institution, but a supermarket's a business, and a supermarket is made up in a very similar structure to like an educational institution now. So I just think an institution is a way of organising and structuring a body of people under a header of what you're trying to get, or what you're trying to say, what you're trying to do. I think we all do that. So I don't think we should kind of sit here and slag off institutions, because we sit here and slag off ourselves, but I think we should maybe talk about why we bother to be these micro or pseudo institutions, like why we have a desire or drive to do it. Or
what is the opposite of more established institutions?
Yeah, I think it's just the difference of, like, you know, being something that is accredited value, i.e. has got public funding or private funding, maybe you could say, or people on a payroll, or something that maybe hasn't been ascribed value in the traditional or kind of capitalist sense, as in we're all working together, we're all doing part-time jobs, but we're still all kind of following this set of parameters that we've set up ourselves in order to have a work ethos or a production line.
So would you call this is like a privately funded institution?
No, it's not privately funded.
But what about the studios? That's your source
No,
of
it's a
income.
self-funded institution. I'd say a privately
But
funded
you
institution
rent-
is if an individual came and gave us money to do this. Do you know what I mean?
But how would you bracket like your form of income?
Yeah.
Because essentially,
I mean, I think we
providing
have income, as in the studios allow us to have this space and the office space, but it doesn't give us any budget for shows. So that's all done. Shows and events like this are done because we want people there, they want to do it there, and we all put a bit in and get shit together. So I'd say it's kind of self-funded through the studios. I don't know what to talk about.
There's a thing that you kind of provide in the sense of sort of stereotypical in the sense of an institution has more reputation than just being an organisation. I mean, can there be any sense that an organisation or an institution could be disruption?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there is like the kind of idea of good and bad.
Is that not kind of boxing one? That you can have I mean, is there any sense that it can be something that can be a fringe within an institution, a fringe institution?
I think we can. I think that we just use institution in a way that we associate it with something that is, like you said, established. And I think that, you know, the word, I mean, it's just semantics, but I think the word does apply to us all in some ways, you know, like you could call a Facebook group an institution, do you know what I mean? Because you've got your little slogan and you've got, we're putting shit up on the wall about this, like, it's not necessarily just like the Tate or your art school.
But my point is that if there's some kind of practice which is outside the institution or outside some establishment, then how is that then reconciled with the idea of being an institution?
I think
there's something which is necessarily extra.
I think you can try and be outside of an established institution, but I think by organising being the operative word, whether you are intending to or not, I think often we find that we're mimicking an institution like on a micro scale, and I don't think that's a good or bad
But how
thing,
can you
really? That's one of the questions we need to talk about, really.
I think people, even if you're trying to work outside the institution, you need the institution to exist to respond to it.
Compromise.
You can't be fringe if the established institutions aren't there for you to go, oh, I'm outside of that. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of your...
Yeah, I mean, they involve each other, obviously.
Is that not a justification of the self-justification of the fact that it is purely off your own back and could, like, people can describe it as a hobby? You know,
some people.
No, like it's like, who are we doing it for? Is the audience just people in the room? Like,
or ourselves.
But that's the difference between a hobby and something else. A hobby is purely for yourself, whereas I think these self-organisations are different because they're intended to for other people's benefit or to interest them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, to share ideas with people. I think that's something I'm interested in, is that I would like to work collaboratively, discussion, and sort of coming up with something new based on other people's opinions. So,
who are the people that we're sharing it with?
Like-minded.
We're all here, aren't we?
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
Can we Will and Ksenia talk, because we're going
And the people.
and everyone else. But yeah, because we were doing like. Can everyone introduce themselves?
Oh, yeah, we're still on the introduction.
Yeah, come on, come Will.
I've been blabbering on nothing, eh?
Yeah, just a brief synopsis of Sunday Painter will do.
It's an art gallery down the road. It's funded by there being 12 art studios. We rent out to artists. That's very similar to this. Basically, that covers the baseline costs. But I'd say we sometimes sell works, and I've got no qualms with selling work. I think it's good for us. It's good for the artists. And so we're probably either a really commercial art-led space or just a really shit commercial gallery. So
Could you talk about, sorry, just because I think this is worth talking about in light of cuts and everything, about the CIC thing and kind of...
No one get registered as a CIC and believe that you're going to get business rates reduced. You're not going to get them reduced. You're going to have to pay full whack. There's loads of misinformation about business rates out there, and if you're really careful and don't just assume just because you're not for profit or anything like that anyone's going to give a shit, because they will. You're a business like anyone else. In their minds, you will have to pay that, and that's what we found. Maybe that sounds really, really cynical. Probably is.
No, but it's good.
Yeah. But that realigns how I see everything, which is like, well, there's no cushioning for us. Therefore, we have to be pretty like strict on what we do and how we do it, and we have to be tight about the rent, and we have to look at ways to bring in more money and be practical about things. But for us, there was a point where financially we were kind of fucked, and we were torn between going on two routes. One, maybe trying to become like a charity, get 100% business rates off, all those things, trying to get funding, and the other was to become more commercial. But for us, weighing it up, I'd much rather become more commercial and try and sell work to collectors and things like that than go down the other route, because the other route, it felt like such a huge compromise. It felt like you could hardly it felt like for us to start out doing that, you could hardly put together like a show. It would have to be something that's so intrinsically about connecting with these other groups and also ticking all the boxes as well, just ticking the boxes. Free tea, coffee, come in, football, tick that off, we've got people through the door. It just doesn't seem genuine to me.
See, that's why I was sort of saying it depends what it is you're trying to achieve from your project, because I am quite interested in getting more people involved, but only because the more points of view there are, the more that you're going to learn. So for me, trying to get a higher footfall somewhere doesn't feel like a negative thing. It feels like
that's fine. But if it's just like box ticking so that you can continue getting your funding.
But that's what I mean. If that's not what you wanted to do, I can totally understand why you see it as a compromise. But
well, it wasn't even that. It was that it would compromise so much our exhibition program.
Yeah.
We'd have to basically completely scrap what we wanted to do in favour of something completely different. But isn't that too much?
I do feel slightly like, because we're sort of just project managing, I'm sure we'll do some shows that we have project managing, I just feel like a lot of what we're going to be doing is all that sort of behind the scenes stuff where we're trying to make sure that all that happens and that it happens smoothly so everyone else can get on with the creative stuff, which I don't mind doing at the moment. But I'll get back to you
also I think the thing also to be aware of is the fact that like a lot of places don't get paid. Like we don't get paid. These guys don't get paid. I know other galleries that are quite big commercial galleries, and no one got paid there for like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But at some point down the line now they are. But I just think like try and
is
put
that sort of self-initiated spaces, or is that?
I don't want to name any names. But,
it's just out of interest because sort of as an
well, it is.
Choice
I mean,
to work for free. But if you're trying to do something you really believe in, you don't really have that choice. So. Because we've been working for free for 3 years. You know, it's just been horrible. we might continue working for free. Like if we don't
it's
get
good to have a hobby though, isn't
it? An expensive hobby.
Yeah, really expensive, really time consuming.
It's definitely hard to sell curating.
Well, I think a key route to go down is obviously like collaboration, and there's lots of other places. Have you heard of Intercity Mainline? Has anyone heard of that? It's like a zine that a couple of friends of mine run, and they basically go around all these kind of other cities that have like small art scenes, and they write about them, and they go there and basically get pissed up with them, like have a good time and see all the work and see the scene that's happening, and then they continue on to the next. It's building all these links, and like they're actually a really good guide to other places. If you've just turned up and you're into art and you want to find out what's going on, it's a really good guide and a good route in. But I think maybe that's because you're not in London. I think it's really important to connect with those other groups and use their models and their advice. But what frustrates me is it feels like there's loads of money out there, like in the art scene. Like, there's there is. We're not getting any, but like it feels like it's almost like this impenetrable art scene, and there's nothing. You're never really told how to get into it or how to get that money. And I think one of the dangers. I mean, there's tons of money in London for art, but the problem is, I see a big problem being art advisors, because in terms of like people that are buying works end up getting this list of must-have artists that are all the same, and it's just a brand. An artist is a brand, and he's got people don't have the balls to like take the risk. Yeah, but I think there are people like that, and I think there are the people who are. Yeah, totally. But it's getting to them, and it's finding those people. It's finding people that want to buy art that are kind of your peers, but maybe young professionals, and kind of bring them in.
There could become like an element of box sticking to that though as well, where if you have someone who supports you financially because they like your work, you keep making that.
Yeah, well that's the danger, but then that's more an individual artist. That's what he has to deal with, you know. And if he or she decides going majority statistically being male, yeah, outrageous. But I think it's more of a personal thing. But I'd much rather like host a dinner, like for a show, than have to not put that show on and put on a show about something really boring that kids might like. Is that harsh?
Oh well.
I'm not naming names. It's fine. It's fine. Anyway, shall I hand it?
Can I just ask Renee to
Yeah, I'm Renee, and basically I've started a journal called Flee Immediately, and it's just, I'm working on the second issue now, so it's quite early on, and I'm still sort of trying to figure out exactly where I want to go. The journal is also sort of about technology and art in a critical and contextual way. I did a master's at Goldsmiths in Interactive Media, and I finished in 2010, and basically after I finished, I just realised that no one understood me, and no one understood what we had done, and so I basically created this journal as an outlet for us to use as a way of just getting our ideas out there. And basically, it's quite experimental in the way that I'm working on it now, and I think that's a big part of when Susanna asked me to participate in this, and when you were talking earlier about the idea of failure, I think that's a big part for me why I did this, is because I could have sort of jumped on with other people, but for me, like, failure is intrinsic to the way that we work anyway, and the way that we learn to work, and the way that our methodologies are in producing whatever we produce. So for me, the ability to fail is actually quite a liberating thing, and that's partly why I did this, and that's why, even though I'm on the second issue, I still am a bit like, the next issue I might even do a completely different sort of methodology and a way of working to make it more collaborative and more collective.
Do you feel that's kind of like given to you by going to art school, the fact that most subjects that are academic, there's a right and a wrong, and there's no flexibility in that, whereas art school is about trial and error, like messing around, and being able to fail and work from the failures?
I think it could be, but I think particularly the way that this master's is run, it's very much about failing, and they actually encourage you to fail almost. They just encourage you to go out there, and it's really just like trying out the theory and practice.
What grade did you get?
Failed miserably.
So you passed it.
Research, did you say?
The master's, the interactive media. So yeah, so for me, the question of institution is quite interesting, because I never considered that. I just said, I'm going to do this and see what happens. I'm still doing it.
So in context to like this idea of like being post-institutional, as in post-institution maybe, I mean, maybe simply it's in the respect that we've kind of come out of school and there's this huge kind of, vast arena of everything, and this idea that, you said people don't understand, people don't understand you, because, you spend such an intense year or 2 years or however long you're at school for, being like hit literally constantly with this mind-blowing stuff, mean, obviously we did it together, so I know what you mean by that, and I you know, because I can completely relate to it. And I think school and kiosks certainly came from this, being confronted with this like total confusion. I mean, it's quite interesting to look at it like that on a more sort of maybe, I don't know, more of a less sort of political way, more of a like, what the hell are we doing with all this information, more of a sort of knowledge, and like a knowledge kind of perspective. Like, where do you feel you are now? Because I mean, you've put so much into this journal so far, and there's still so much to go. And so, how do you feel sort of comfortable with it, or are you sort of battling with it, or you know?
No, I think I am comfortable with it because I think it was always an experiment from the beginning, and I can still experiment. And the people that, like, it's basically brought to lots of people that I've studied with, even people I haven't studied with, to be able to have an outlet for things. And from what I've heard from people, they really enjoy doing things for it because it is an opportunity that they didn't have before, and they were really lost as well. So I think it's quite a good thing, and I think it can change, and I'm willing to work with other people. I'm willing to.
Do you see it as an outlet, or do you see it as your kind of chosen sort of job, or is it a hobby, or what can you name it? I mean, do we need to name it? That's another thing Richard that came up with. What was the importance of naming it? What we're doing? I mean, are you a self-organised institution? Like what can you tell us?
Well, I think the first issue was an outlet because it was very much, I just had to do something. Like, I was so frustrated that I just needed to, it was my outlet of even just frustration almost, of just like doing something. Now I think it's more, I guess it would be more of a job in a way, and I've sort of stepped back a bit from necessarily like writing in it, but helping the people. Like, I produce a call for submissions. In terms of a name, I don't know. And I'm fine with not knowing.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. Maybe when you're kind of otherwise it's like, just one more thing I'd like to ask is, how do you feel about the whole sort of the financial sort of implications? I mean, I don't want to sort of cry, but I mean, if you're sort of not getting funding, does it matter? Apart from like the practical sort of like, oh god, I've got to actually work loads more in my part-time job to be able to print it and all that kind of stuff. Like, is it aside from that, or is it so much of a problem? Because I mean, obviously it's different with like sort of self-led spaces and gallery spaces and so on. Because you sort of you're needing funding to keep the kind of physical sort of structure going and stuff. But I think we certainly. It hasn't even been in school. It's not. We haven't even looked at one.
I think that's quite important though, because like a lot of stuff that we've been talking about so far has been about money, and the thing that we're doing is absolutely like the whole point. One of the whole points of it is that it's free, and I think that I don't know. Maybe it's quite interesting to think about working without money. And does that mean that we are just doing hobby?
Yeah.
Or like, and then kind of further than that, like what does that lead into? Are we just doing a hobby towards?
I think maybe it's a hobby with like the potential to maybe earn some money.
Yeah, which I think is like I think that's quite important.
Because I've had a similar conversation with someone, but I think it depends on what context you use the word, because hobby can be quite a patronising word for what we all do. But technically, we're not really getting paid to do it. So I think it probably really becomes a job when you're actually earning money from doing it, because that's kind of
What
the
about
definition.
volunteering?
What, sorry?
What about volunteering?
What about volunteering?
Or you don't get paid, but you're doing something that's more of a usual job.
I wouldn't describe volunteering as my job, though. I'd describe volunteering as a hobby.
Really?
I don't know. I think this is certainly.
It's like if you
this is like our conversation. This is exactly.
I think it sort of depends. It depends how much you're putting into something. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm coming from the same point of view, and I have been told. I got very irate when I was told that I was doing it as a hobby, but it was. I think it was more the context that it was said in, and the person that was saying it to me. It's not a great word to use, but I think also job is quite a basic word to use it's a personal interest that I like to share with other people, and just because it's really hard work, it doesn't make it necessarily a job. It's just something else. But it's quite specific to the art world, though, isn't it? That you do something like that because you're passionate about it, and whether it's music or art, or you could say the same thing. But it's quite specific to what we do. It's not something you get. If you did it in engineering, it'd be
otherwise
uproar.
it would be called a
into-
passion. It wasn't a hobby.
It could be called a passion, yeah, but it's an unpaid passion. You know, it's
But
not.
you can get a return which isn't money. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
I think the issue with money is simplistic. You have done so much work for free, which is then led on, and so it's my job. Like I've worked a lot for free, and then it's led on to paid work. So I very much say it was a job.
Well, it's a career choice, maybe.
I think this issue of money is quite interesting because I obviously don't really have money at the moment. Like I have a few people that have sort of donated because they won awards and they're supporting different things because they're sharing the wealth, basically. But for me, like I have tried to think of other ways of doing this journal without necessarily having to, because obviously I can't pay people to contribute at the moment. But one way I was thinking of doing it is each person who contributes they would donate money to print the issue as well, and then in return they get that amount in the issue, and it's up to them to decide what to do with it. So it's not necessarily the money, it's also the issue that has value in itself, and they could sell it themselves. So that's another way of distribution. So it's a way of thinking of money not just straight up as money, but what you're doing as well also has value. It's not necessarily the money. So.
Well, I was thinking it's kind of more like a tool, like a means to an end, rather than it being like an influence on the actual work itself. That's kind of, just so because you were talking about probably I think it was when you guys talking about the kind of purity of the work, and I think maybe that's where the distinction between the established institution and the sort of micro institutions comes. It's like Eddie the Eagle Museum in Holland has been doing things like setting up their own kind of breweries in order to fund their art shows. It's like they're still selling things and making profit, but the profit all goes back into the art. So it avoids them having to go to things like, third parties who obviously have their own agendas, and they can kind of control it themselves.
So there's a distinction between the art practice and profit.
Yeah.
Right. So So
There's Andor Gallery in Hackney did that. They set up a cafe. Well, I'm not sure how much money a cafe is going to make, but the idea is that it pays for the gallery, and so it's kind of again it's not.
But that's exactly what's happening here with the studios, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it keeps the
And there's a lot of exchange which goes on. I mean, totally, like aside from money, just trading. I think a lot in Peckham because so many things are not for profit that you end up kind of exchanging just favours really.
Yeah.
And that, that's got so much worth and it's not.
That is the amazing thing about when you've got nothing, that you find it's a much more creative process, I think, and it's like easier to talk with other people and sort of, like we've done some quite big shows with no budget whatsoever, but it's because you have nothing.
Yeah, it forces creativity.
Yeah,
It forces a creative way round.
And that's something I have slight concerns about, that if we do become funded, how that's going to
People
affect.
don't want to have that exchange
Yeah,
as much.
it becomes impossible to ask someone to do something for free because your money or your budget's run out, because they sort of see you as someone that has money. So it is a concern that could completely change things as well.
Yeah,
but it could make things better for people because we're trying to spread it out. But it's.
I guess it's like a question of how successful you want to be in terms of kind of saying that you're starting out because there's a gap in the mainstream, and then therefore how mainstream you want to become yourself to sort of fill that gap, or whether it should stay as a sort of.
I think the gap we've seen is actually just something we wanted to do. I don't know if it's like a gap in the mainstream, what everyone wants to do, but it's something we're trying to create an opportunity for ourselves as well as other curators. I don't know.
And we're not compromising what the curators do. Like, they have the freedom to explore their own ideas. There's not a preconceived kind of input that they have to give us, really.
But I think it's easy to do that because this is year one. If we do it for 5 years, I don't think that would be the case in 5 years. No, I don't think it's. Yeah.
Can I propose a different term? Self-organisation is really interesting, a very kind of long historical trajectory. I just wondering what we're actually talking about in some cases is more a case of group entrepreneurship or group enterprise, and I wonder if we can get some precision in some discussion so we can understand it.
Before we get precision, can Ksenia just introduce what she's doing?
Sorry.
Because Ksenia is singularly very self-organised and is self-organised in terms of running an architecture business, looking at doing project. I'm not going to do you. You can introduce me.
Basically, I set up an architecture office just under 2 years ago because of a frustration we realised within the industry, as a an institution or a practice, I couldn't do what I thought was important to do. And funnily enough, there's been like kind of thread of everything we've discussed running through my work, because I started off by volunteering for an architecture project for an NGO, and that kind of launched the practice in a way, because it meant that I could take on bigger projects and actually get paid for them. But then all that money is basically invested back into the practice for me to be able to work for free on projects that I actually want to do. And they're like cultural, curatorial projects and social projects. And there's one at the moment about the Winter Olympics, which is happening in Russia in 2 years' time, and about kind of the human impact of the Olympics, both on London and in the future on this city, about kind of like set up human connections and critique kind of urban development and architectural development.